Can you be made to pay for repairs to other people's units if you're living in a unit title development? Can a body corporate that runs the development require that you not use your unit for an Airbnb? These are two interesting questions that arise when you're living in a unit title development. Hi, I'm Rod Thomas. I'm an associate professor from AUT Law School, and I'm here to answer questions with regard to living in an apartment building. This is Apartment Living Matters. The first question I've been asked is this: I'll never be able to buy a standalone house, so I'm looking to buy an apartment. What do I need to know about signing up for a body corporate? Well, this is a really good question because in actual fact, unit titles are one of the more complex forms of title that you can have. And when the government legislated the Unit Titles Act, they provided for two forms of compulsory disclosure that have to be given by a vendor to a purchaser. And if these disclosures aren't properly made, it actually enables the purchaser ultimately to walk away from the purchase because they're so important. But practically speaking, there are two things that are very important for you as a person looking to buy into unit title development. For reasons that will become apparent, the first of those is you need to make sure that the body corporate has a very healthy long-term maintenance fund. So you need to check that. Secondly, you can look at the body corporate minutes to see whether the building has been a leaky building. Because there's a saying that once a leaky building, always a leaky building. And that can lead to very, very onerous financial obligations, even if it's not your unit that is leaking. Now to the next question. Do the benefits of a body corporate usually outweigh the costs of paying into it? It's very, very important to have a properly run body corporate that fulfills all its statutory obligations. One of the key ones of those is ensuring that owners understand their rights and obligations under the Act. The next question is, how much legal responsibility does a body corporate have? Well, the body corporate is responsible for running all the development, and they're responsible for a lot of the repairs that happen around the development, even if they're repairs to other people's units and your unit, and they're responsible for the running of the body corporate. So it's really, really important that the body corporate does function well. And there are quite complex provisions in the Act which require the body corporate to do certain things. And for lay people, it can be very difficult to understand those without getting proper professional advice. Next question I've been asked is, I've checked the body corporate finances and it doesn't look like there's much money set aside for maintenance. Should I be worried about this? Well, if there's not a healthy amount of money already in the body corporate account, you can actually be called upon to pay quite significant amounts. This can either rise due to ordinary maintenance obligations or, heaven help, because the building is a leaky building and requires a lot of money to be spent on remediation. So the next question I've been asked is this: leaks have been found in another unit in the building. Can I be made to pay for those repairs? Well, in terms of the operation of New Zealand law, this is rather fascinating because the courts have tended to say that any repairs required to the exterior of the whole of the building are a matter that affect all of the owners because they're all in it together. So therefore, you can be required to pay for repairs of the roof on a 20-unit development, even if you're on the ground floor. And in actual fact, there's a lot of uncertainty about what repairs you are required to pay for in terms of your unit, as opposed to the body corporate being required to pay in terms of the whole development. And that is because in New Zealand, the courts have found that almost anything within a unit is structural because it supports the whole of the building. The next question is this: what if I don't have the money? what actually happens is that the body corporate by law is required to do this work, and it's required to get the contributions from the owners in accordance with formula that is set out in the Act. So first of all, the body corporate have to do the work, they have to get the money, and other owners would not be prepared to pay your share. So what happens is if you don't have the money, first of all, you lose your entitlement to vote. So you no longer have a say in the running of the body corporate. And secondly, ultimately, if you don't actually make that payment, then the body corporate can sell your unit. What if the body corporate committee stuffs up? For example, hires dodgy contractors to do a substandard paint job. What recourse do I have? Well, again, we've got this division of responsibility and rights. So the body corporate is run by the body corporate committee. And under the Act, the body corporate committee have to do a proper and responsible job on behalf of all of the owners. And they actually have liability people on the committee, not only to the body corporate, not only to third parties that they contract with, but on the state of the existing law, but also potentially to individual owners. So if you are on the committee and you don't do a proper job, then you can face significant personal liability. And this actually becomes quite important in terms of making sure that you fulfill your statutory obligations, which is one of the reasons why I always suggest to people that they hire a professional body corporate manager to advise them, because down the track they can end up with significant problems. Here's a good question. Do you have to have any credentials or qualifications to join the body corporate committee? Well, it's a bit like an incorporated society, like your tennis club. It consists of people who volunteer to be on the committee, and they come from all different parts of life and have different experiences. So you're required by the Act to act in good faith and to act reasonably, and in fact if you don't, you can be held accountable. But the interesting thing is that if you are a professional and you are on the committee and you give professional advice, then you can be held to a standard of care that is a lot more significant and onerous than, say, somebody who's a retired person who happens to be on the committee. Are members of a body corporate committee paid? Well, it's actually really interesting because under the Act, it actually gives the body corporate all the powers of a natural person. But then it says you can only use these powers for the purpose of giving effect to the Act. So one of the questions that's often asked is, well, does this test mean that we can pay members of the body corporate? And the answer is a little uncertain. But I always suggest to bodies corporate that they definitely do, because the reality is if you pay somebody for taking the minutes or for looking after the finances a couple of $100 a year, then the reality is, in my experience, that they'll do a far better job rather than just simply relying on volunteers, just by virtue of the fact that they have some form of responsibility. So I certainly think that that is something that the Act authorises bodies corporate to do, and I think it's a very good practice. Okay, now we come to that very interesting question. Can a body corporate stop me from using my apartment as an Airbnb? Well, this is fascinating because all around Auckland you have body corporate rules in high-rise apartment buildings that actually stop people from using their apartments for Airbnb. But the question is, can they legally? And believe it or not, the jury is out on this. A lot of disputes go to the tenancy tribunal, and there's a very strong argument, since you own your apartment, that if the use you want to use your apartment for is valid under general law, then the body corporate have no interest or entitlement to demand you use your unit for another activity or a more restricted activity. So there's a really interesting case that's come out of the Tenancy Tribunal in Wellington, where somebody in a Wellington development sought to use their unit for a brothel. And the other owners were quite upset about this and altered the rules of the body corporate to say that you couldn't use your unit for this purpose. And the matter went to the Tenancy Tribunal, and they made a determination that the rule was, as they call it, ultra vires or ineffective, because there was no prohibition in that part of town against using your home as a brothel. So I think the rules are really there for a different purpose. They're there basically to tell you that you can't do certain things that cause undue noise or undue activity, and it's more on the effect of the activity rather than the nature of the activity. Now we come on to something that I guess is associated, which is, can the body corporate stop me from hanging out my washing to dry on my balcony? Again, these body corporate rules quite often say that you can't do that sort of thing because owners feel that it somehow lets down the quality and the nature of the development. And again, there's a bit of ambiguity about this, because one of the things that the Act says is it preserves everyone's right to quiet enjoyment of their unit. And it is possible that a tribunal might say that my quiet enjoyment of my unit is detrimentally affected if I go out on the balcony and I'm surrounded by washing hanging up on the deck to the left and the deck to the right. I've got a final question. Given the potential complexities and challenges of body corporates, why would I ever want to get involved in apartment living? Well, here it's actually quite interesting. I think this is one of the reasons which for me makes unit titles such a fascinating area, because in New Zealand we're used to thinking of owning our property like a quarter acre, as they used to say, Pavlova paradise. And we think if we own real estate, then it's ours and nobody should be able to tell us what to do in it. That's not necessarily the overseas example. If you're living in an apartment in New York or Paris or perhaps Rome, these are the sorts of issues that you face. So we've got this convergence of property ownership together with the problems and complexities that inevitably arise when you're sharing and you're living within close proximity of other people. So we've got this tension, and it arises quite often. I have to say that for a lot of people who do live in apartments where the body corporate is well run and there's lots of communication and it's well funded, these issues are really just part and parcel of living in the development, and quite often you actually want to have these issues resolved properly to enhance the quality of your development living in what is actually quite a confined space close to a lot of other people. Thanks for all of your questions. I hope the information that I've been able to share is helpful to you. You can find more information on the notes on this presentation. Thank you very much for watching Apartment Living Matters.